Please tell us what happened on the night of June 13th. Be as specific and detailed as possible. Look, I'm going to make this as quick as possible for the obvious reasons. I will give my version of the events for why I was fired, and you're going to do your damnedest to try and get to my surveillance package, or at least something to keep me going in between jobs. How does that sound? Do we have a deal? It started about half a year ago when I had just moved into the area. I was looking to pick up some work as a veterinary technician, but there was no clinic hirings, so I decided that I would take my job to make my way to become ends meet until I could get my foot in the door with some veterinary clinics in my area. As you know, I had managed to land a security job at a nearby hospital. It was the hospital, to be exact. It was a pretty quiet job. I walked around, patrolled every hour or so, struck up conversations with the nurses and patients when I was feeling chatty, and spent most of my time reading A Song of Fire and Ice. What? It's not like you can fire me twice. You would have to be surprised what I caught off some of the guards were doing when I stepped in to relieve them. I'm just here to give you a feel of my routine and lay out all the cards on the table. June 5th, 13th began as a pretty quiet night. There would be no intelligent drunks that needed to fix their stomachs pumped and didn't have to restrain my junkies who were fending for one another fix. But they were stuck in detox. I liked those nights, and best of all, where I didn't have to worry about getting a drunk vomiting on my shoes or have to talk to a problem patient back into their beds. By the way, in the interview, the boss man said nothing about two restrained patients, that they weren't free to leave. I'm just saying, with a little more training without protocol, maybe about we wouldn't have this situation. Did we ever, I wouldn't be talking you through that night. Anyways, it was around 8 o'clock when I got a call from the boss. He told me that the hospital was about to be getting a very important patient and asked me if I felt up to the task. I told him yes, because there wasn't another option. He could try and call someone else to do my work at 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. at graveyard shift, but then there weren't allowed snowball's chances, and hell, he would be able to find some in such short notice. I agreed to watch the VIP, even though I had no real clue on what I was doing. I decided to ask the charge nurses for some information about the hospital security typically does with the important patients. I assumed that it was probably some B-list celebrity who had gotten tipsy at the club and rolled her ankle on the dance floor. The charge nurse told me that I was assumed, and I would be sitting in their room making sure to keep media or strangers out while doctors treated her. I asked if she had any idea where she was coming in, and that was when she told me it was Christine Parker. I had no idea who that was. The charge nurse was apparently a big fan of America's Most Wanted and watched every week before it was canceled. She told me that in 2011, an 11-year-old had gone missing on her way to home from school. This girl, Christine Parker, had apparently been missing for over 3 years until today. She was picked up on the side of the roads from a nearby forest by highway patrol. She was set to arrive at the hospital in 30 minutes to treat the injuries she sustained in the escape from her captor. I did a quick walk around the hospital to make sure there weren't any news crews outside. Apparently, the police misled them by the media by telling them that she was being sent to a larger metropolitan hospital while quietly sending Christine out to a hospital in the boondocks. Of course, this meant that they had to post up near the hospital. They told the media about it, otherwise they would catch on to their duplicity. Their ploy had worked, and there was no one in sight. The girl would be allowed to convince in peace without the media buzzing around like flies on a shit heap. Christine arrived and was taken up to the OR wing of the hospital. This wasn't because she needed surgery, because the OR was shut down on the weekends. I always assumed it was closed because the surgeons wanted some time to play around with the 18 holes on that weekend without having to worry about checking in on their wards. She was brought into the OR because there weren't a whole lot of people there, and it would be easier to keep the non-essential personnel out of the way. There were a flurry of doctors around her, and I couldn't really get a good look at her, although for the whirlwind of the white coats and nurses' scrubs, I caught a glimpse. She had dirty brown hair and looked like it was a bird's nest that hadn't been combed in a long time. There were scars along her arms and legs that I'm fairly certain didn't stop at the sleeves of their clothes. Her right hand was shattered and it looked like it had been shoved into an industrial thrash compactor. Bones poked out of her hands like pins on a pincushion. She was exclamated and was looked to see that she had been through hell. Doctors took the blood sample and run to some tests and order a few scans. The nurses pulled the curtain and helped her change it to some scrubs. When they pulled the curtain back, I saw that the scars indeed had not stopped at her sleeves. The nurse asked some basic questions and then went on her way to treat the other patients. The only information I only caught was that she was 14. She didn't know if she had any allergies, and she had been held captive in the woods for over 3 years. Once the nurses left, it was just me and Christine in the hospital room. I had no clue of what to say to her. She was obviously shell-shocked. I'm not a really conversationalist, so I tried to keep my trap shut and try not to look at her injuries. I didn't do a good enough job because she caught me looking at her hand. She raised her broken hand and said, "That hurt like a bitch." She gasped and raised her hand to her mouth as if she said something horrible. I tried to put on the best smile and told her that it was all right if she wanted to swear. She paused and said uncertainty, "Fuck, shit, balls." She spoke like she was testing them out and enjoyed how they rolled off her tongue. She enjoyed telling me that he wouldn't let her swear. It was here that I breached protocol and asked her what had happened out in the woods. I wanted to have that information ready for the police when they arrived, so maybe I could save her the trouble for rehashing it, the two stone-faced officers. I remember the time they had asked a victim to describe their attacker's genitals, who then broke down by being forced to remember the trauma. I had tried to give her the mercy and protect her that she had been exposed so much. She then looked down and said, "The hand doesn't hurt as much as you think. I think for the fact that I had time to steel myself for what I had to do. I needed that so broken so I could slip off the cuffs. I had to do it, otherwise he would take it from me again. Do you understand?" The kid smashed her own hand up. She did it so she could slip the cuffs. And then I asked a question that I wish I never asked. I asked her what her captiver was taking her, thinking that maybe he had given her a puppy or a doll to assert control over her. Christine lowered her hand to her stomach for a second, as she was having some intense intestinal issues, until she said, "I'm late." The horror in that statement barely had time to sink before she continued. She said she missed her period before when her captor found out. He beat her viciously. She told me that he kept striking her until she was on the ground and then kicked in the stomach. She started to cry. There wasn't a single thing I could think to get her to stay calm other than "It's over." Around this time a nurse arrived and gave Christine a sedative. I think they did this so they could examine the extent of her injuries without causing her any more pain or trauma reliving it. I hate to say it, but I was thankful that she was out cold. I didn't want to hear any more about the horrors that she had endured over the 3 years. The scars had improperly healed the bones, where they were a testament to the tortures that she had suffered. I watched her over for a few hours, and tried not to look closely at the hundreds of scars. Some collaged and healed, while others looked like they were weeks old. The soles of her feet were blackened and cut up from the running through the woods for miles of seeking help. I tried my best not to look at the mangled right hand that she had stomped and broken so she could slip off the cuffs. I tried not to look. It was around 5 o'clock when the man had showed up in the OR. I was getting ready to kick him out when I asked if I was watching over Christine Parker. He was an average-looking guy. He was wearing jeans and had a weary look to him. I told him that I was watching over a private patient whose identity cannot be known to me, and just like the guide tells us to say, I thought he was home to the vulture from the newspaper who had slipped in. But that was when he told me that he was her father, Richard Parker. He kept on pressing, and eventually I relented under the condition that I stay in the room while he was there. I brought him to the room, and he stood over the broken body of his girl. It looked like she was about to break into tears at the sight of her injuries, but she managed to keep herself under control. As she was unconscious, there was nothing much he could do or say to her. He stroked the side of her face and then sat down next to me. We sat in silence for 5 minutes before he struck up a conversation with me. He told me about his daughter, how she liked those frilly Disney princesses, and how she used to be afraid of the dark, that she used to have to buy a nightlight. How he used to carry her around on his shoulders, and then there he nearly cried. He buried his face in his hands and wept. He looked like a man who was weeping at a funeral. In a sense, I guess he was. The daughter he knew had died. She would have never lived in scar emotionally damaged life. He took a couple of minutes to get himself under control. He told me that his wife would be there shortly. We talked for a little more. It was mainly small talk. I can't even remember what we talked about exactly. He was more focused on Christine than talking, but I think he felt uncomfortable with the silence. I don't have the exact time, but I think we were probably dragged into a conversation on for an hour or so. It was around 7:30 when Christine started to come out from a sedative. Richard Parker noticed her stirring and rushed to her side. He stroked the face of her face as she opened her eyes. He leaned down and planted a kiss on her forehead and whispered something to her ear. He turned towards me and told me that he promised that he'd let his wife know when she's awake, and he left for the main lobby just as my radio went off my ear. It was my boss radioing as he could take over my shift. I went down to the command post and greeted my boss. He typically showed up 15 minutes early to let me off with a few extra minutes. He asked me how it went, and I told him that I'd been pretty quiet, except for when the father visit. A look of confusion crossed his face, and he told me that Christopher and Regina Parker were supposed to be coming around noon, so doctors and nurses could bandage up and treat her before the reunion. The realization hit me like a foot stomping on the head. I sprinted back towards the OR. I sprinted down the hallway, dodging the nurses and doctors alike. Christine was the bone white, and she was looking, her eyes confirm her worst fears. She sat frozen on the bed. She looked like she had seen the devil herself, and to her eyes she probably did. I was out of breath from running, but I managed to wheeze out, "Who was that?" She spoke in a whisper, but it felt like she was shouting the words right in my ears. "It was him." I croaked, "What did he tell you?" She looked up at him, and that in the moment her eyes went wide as saucers. She said, "He said to me that he loved the time we spent together, and that we should do it The rest of the words cut off her throat as she broke down wailing and weeping. My boss arrived at the time, and I was fired almost on the spot. That's my story. I know I messed up, but how could I have known who that guy was? Well, I know to say I'll let it all out loud. I guess I was really wrong in this, but I doubt I'm going to get a termination package. This trip out there was just a waste of time. Well, not completely. Maybe I'll go give Christine a visit. Why are you looking at me like that? What is going on here? The whole interview thing isn't about my surveillance or my wrongful termination. This is the interview about Christine. Oh God, is she all right? Christine had been missing since that last night. We have no clues on where she could be. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video. And I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Ms. Darkshigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, please stay pretty.